It was just a few minutes before 12. And then the bombers came in again. We heard them because there were a big bulk of bombers, about 150 of them. But suddenly there began a shooting, and it was so loud, the shooting, that you cannot imagine how loud this was. Even the machine guns from the bombers we had, tack, 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 tack. And soon we've seen the first bomber going down, spinning the propellers. It fell down for us very near. And one vessel, we could see it really good, and we saw it crashing inside. And then the big engines, they were burning and rolling down. But soon also the others, there were 3 bombers just almost in one time, just in front of us. We were just as being in a cinema, you know. We had full picture. All was there, we could see everything. In 1 or 2 minutes, all was over. There were only the parachutes in the air and nothing else.
All these prisoners who came back home after the war, the camp life had huge impact on them, and it influenced their post-war life. Not only their life, but also their children.
And I says, "Dad, you never tell us anything much about that." And he got really mad at me, and he turned to me and he says, "What do you want me to tell you?" I says, "Well, I'd like you to tell me some stuff about when you were on that march." I says, because just when you go to these prison camps, just to see some of the stuff and hear how the people got there and everything was horrible. And he turned to me and he says, "So what do you want me to tell you?" He says, "Do you want me to tell you how my friend had dysentery, was blood all the way down his pants, and then the next thing you know, they take him out of the marching line into the woods. You hear a gunshot and you never see him again." And he turned around and walked away and never said any more.
It changed their lives. Sometimes it changed in a brutal way. Some of the prisoners became drinkers after the war. They drank a lot, and there were many wounds they carried after the war. So I think the camp life had a great impact on them, and it changed their life forever, I think.
Walking in here, I got goosebumps. You know, I sensed my father throughout this entire journey. I've sensed my father, but I felt him here more than any place. I felt a little bit of sadness because I didn't know him. You know, all I know is stories my mom's told me. This is what he was like, and this is what he did. But you come here and you stand inside these pines, and you just, God, it took me over.
It was exciting. The P-51 in World War II flew above the bombers and protected the B-17s, B-24s from being shot down by the German fighters. And our job was literally to protect them on the way to the target and the way back. Oh, suicide. You had a hell of a feeling because you knew it was dangerous. Down near the ground, we were strafing trains, trucks, or planes, or radar stations like me. And you're close to the ground. The Germans had anti-tank guns and aircraft guns. They're trying to shoot you down, and you're trying to shoot them down. And it was a dangerous fight. You were subject to be shot down, ended up as a POW like me. Life as a prisoner was never easy. Outdoor toilets, just a building. Food was at a premium, always. Weather was always rough. Life was rough.
The center compound where I was primitive. We had no water. We had a wash house, but no toilet. The only toilet facilities was a trough at the end and a bucket. We had a old-fashioned circular stove for heat. The soups that the Germans gave, we called them the Black Death and the Green Death. They were barely edible.
With a silent longing for loved ones whom we never quite sure we would see again. It was equally difficult. It was life as a POW. One or two out of the 10 men in the room had nightmares. We had a lot of men who just couldn't take it psychologically. Anytime the Germans are firing at your plane and explosions in that belly of that plane, and your comrades are hit, their insides are all over the plane. You see horrible death, all hell breaking loose, and you age. This is where boys became men overnight.
December 1944, there were 3 rumors. One rumor is the Germans are going to kill us all because the Russians are now only 100 miles away. They're at Auschwitz in East Poland. The second rumor was the Germans are just going to pull stakes and run away and leave us for the Russians, and that was equally bad. The third rumor was they're going to walk us out of there. By this time, there were 10,000 of us, so we're sitting there. There's no way they can walk 10,000 prisoners out of here. January 29th, we found different. We started walking. At 2 o'clock in the morning, it was about 10 degrees temperature and about 8 inches of snow on the ground. For the first 5 hours, I don't remember seeing anything except the rear ends of the 3 men ahead of me. We walked 12 miles that night. No water. You can eat all the snow you want, it doesn't quench your thirst. You're still just as thirsty. Some of the men had somehow gotten small sleds. Several men had bad frostbite and blisters and were limping. My best friend from navigation school had such bad feet he had to be carried in one of the carts, which brought up the rear with men and the guards' supplies. The 4th day we walked about 10 miles, and we slept outside that night.
It was cold as hell, and you walked along with the rest of the men, always hungry, simply surviving, simply surviving, simply surviving. Life in the United States as a black man, as a Negro, in 1940 was hell. POW life was mild, considered segregation and discrimination in the United States as a black man in 1940, 41, 42. Even when you got home, racism, segregation. At least In Stalag Luft 3, I was treated as an equal human being, and under the circumstance of hunger, loneliness, and all the other things, food, despair.
The defense of your country is the highest thing that you can do. Some wounds are worse than others. Actually, there are always wounds which never should have happened, but that's going to be true in civilian life. So it's not always fair. Most of us never for a minute thought that we were doing the wrong thing, even in the prison camp. We believed it was right, that the other side was wrong politically and in God's name.
Life is beautiful, only if it's your attitude. The experience has been exciting, worthwhile. It's been part of me all my life.
I think the biggest adjustment is when people came home injured, and that changes everything, right? So you've got about 650,000 wounded returning to the US after the war, and you can't return to any kind of normalcy when that happens, because now you've got, a husband who either may be too injured to work or may have psychological impairments, which no one talks about in this time period. But that does mean a disruption and a reorientation of family life. The psychological wounds are things that men really did suppress. They were taught to suppress as part of a sort of normal masculinity of that era. And really, we don't even have a language of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, until after Vietnam. But that doesn't mean men weren't coming home traumatized. I mean, think of the things that they must have seen, especially if they were going to the camps and liberating the camps, but also just, watching buddies die. And we know so many stories of the horrors of war that men experience. When these men come home, they're really encouraged to not talk about any of that you'll be fine, it'll just take time, you'll be fine. So there's no real culture for them to come home to that understands the psychological impact of war. If you're not talking about trauma or the nightmares you're having or the things that you brought back with you that you're still not able to adjust from, that is going to have an impact on the body and on the psyche. But men definitely are taught not to complain about their physical stuff. They just push through, and that's magnified for soldiers. Just push through the worst thing you feel, whether that's psychological or physical. The cost of a Purple Heart is really all of the hopes and dreams that a family had before the war, before the soldier went away, before the soldier came back either injured or didn't come back at all, or, had some ailment that took their life after the war. I'm thankful for the service of everyone who fought for this country. I understand the sacrifice, but I would imagine if it were me, that Purple Heart that I get to hang on a wall or in a frame in my house would be a poor substitute for the man I loved, for the hope and dreams that I had for my family, for all of it.